Well, welcome everyone. In case you hadn't already noticed, we have a collection, a panel of absolute rock stars today from the United States, France, Saudi Arabia, and China in the business of everything from aerospace, defense, finance, semiconductors, telecoms, and transportation. So please join me in welcoming Patrice Caine, Chairman and CEO of TELUS Group. Patrice.
Good afternoon.
Omar Ishrak, Chairman of the Board at Intel, former Chairman of the Board at Medtronic. Hani Kablawi. Hani, there you are, yes. Head of International at BNY Mellon. Ken Moore, MasterCard's Chief Innovation Officer. Ken, thank you. Patrick Jean, M31 Capital's founder and managing partner. Thank you. And last but not least, Saudi Arabia's own Olayan Al-Wataid, CEO of Saudi Telecom. Thank you. I'm Ryan Chilcott. I'm an Emmy-nominated international correspondent. I've spent more than 25 years running around the world looking at all things, including tech. I consider myself, relative to the panelists on in today's discussion, a meta-industrial Luddite, right? So I'd like to start the conversation there, and for you to perhaps, a few of you, to, in 30 seconds or less, explain to me what you think of when I say meta-industrial revolution. What the heck is that? Go ahead.
Looking at me, I'll start.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, the very fact that you're saying meta says that this is a lot to do with data. More data, so much data that is beyond what we know how to manage today. And industrial because it's applied to different industries. So that's one way to kind of think about it. I'll talk about it very briefly from a computational perspective. You know, there's four things that are happening concurrently, which is a positive circle. Starting with the ubiquitousness of computers. They're going to be everywhere. You think they're everywhere today? They'll be in more places. Second is the intercomputer connectivity, which is driven by what is called low latency. That means the speed of connection is shrinking very rapidly, so things that could be done in one computer can be done in several computers at the same time. And the third is the access to the cloud, the size of the cloud that continues to grow and therefore hosts more data. And the fourth is because of all of this, you're getting more data. And the more data you get, the better your algorithms get. The better your algorithms get, you know, the more things you can do with it, and can be applied to many different places. So the only other thing I'll say is that this is, in my mind, not something that stops. It's continuous, and it's growing exponentially, and the world 10 years from now, I can say, is almost unimaginable from what it is today.
Well, that was a very long 30 seconds, Omar.
Could I maybe come in?
No,
sorry.
But, so, Ken, please, go ahead. And also, if you could address the issue of where does the internet and, let's say, Industry 3.0, as we think of it, end, and this meta-industrial revolution begin?
Sure. So maybe let me comment on the first question. I mean, if I was talking to my grandmother in an elevator, I would say to her, there are a collection of technologies out there that are individually important, but which will come together in ways, some of which we can imagine, some of which we can't now, that are going to change every business on the planet. And that would be my pitch to her. That is what the fourth, our meta-industrial revolution is. How it's different from the third is that the computational power, the data sets, the technologies that we have to play with in the fourth industrial revolution, up to and including the metaverse, the meta in the fourth industrial revolution, are coming at us with such speed and will be so transformative that we can start to see today what the world 3, 4, 5, and out to 7 years is going to look like.
If I may, the simplest form of looking at it is to say the jury is still out on the final definition of meta as we know it. However, as far as now is concerned, it's an evolution of Web 3.0 that is taking us to a stage where identity is being challenged, and value exchange is being redefined in a way that makes a decentralized approach of content creation and value exchange.
Please.
So first of all, I think it's too fancy for people to talk about meta industry, something meta about anything. I think this is yet to be defined. For me, in a very simplistic way, is atoms meeting bytes. And also in the real world is different innovations from biotech, genomics, and to nanotechnology, and to Internet of Things, to AI, and all this coming together. And by the way, so with today you're meeting with some of the Chinese delegates coming to this event. Many of them are great practitioners in actually adding bytes to atoms. And they're all doing their own version of, I guess, this meta-industrial revolution. I don't think we should be too much fixated on the definition itself. And everybody is experimenting with their version. And I think it creates a lot of data. And that's making our productivity keep going up. And thanks to the contribution of your business.
And let me, Honey, if I could ask you, today, Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, is releasing the Meta Quest Pro. It's a virtual reality headset. It's a set of goggles. It sells for $1,500, releasing today. The company's called Meta. Their goggles are called Meta, or at least they got them in the name. Is that the meta-industrial revolution?
Ryan, it's a very smart branding strategy, I would say. And
it's a branding strategy.
It started a couple of years ago with the renaming of the company. And I think it is a very smart branding strategy. I think if you were to go to the search engines, there actually isn't a unified, uniform definition of the metaverse today. And so you'll find, and therefore, I actually agree with all of your speakers. And I would say it is potentially a coming together of augmented, virtual, and physical reality in a way that can be experienced cognitively a little bit differently than you might experience only one of these things on its own. And the other concept that still hasn't been shared here, and so maybe I'll extend on it a little bit, is that today there is a centralized world that we're already all operating in that brings physical and augmented and virtual realities together. We've been having virtual meetings for a very long time with augmented reality. We've been having we've been taking tours of innovation centers or cyber centers in virtual reality settings, and we've been training and developing our own staff for a while in that same way. But all of those things so far have been on what we'll call centralized platforms. And the revolution, if you want to call it that, or going to 3.0, might take us into an environment that is a little bit different, because it might bring decentralization to the underlying platforms. It might bring different worlds and platforms together. And therein lies a lot of questions that I'm sure we'll get into some of which.
Leon.
Yeah, I think the concept of decentralization is the theme around what is happening today on the meta as we know it. This is simply a complete shift where we will be transacting and doing business on a virtual world. And that is taking us to a stage where we need to create new ways of identifying people, transacting and doing value exchange in a totally different way than we do it today. That will include a lot of, obviously, technology development to empower all of that, including AI, artificial intelligence, and computing power, and so on. But will require a lot of policy making to make sure that whatever we are doing is going to be beneficial and hopefully not harmful.
Thank you. Patrice, so I think we're starting to get a definition, or at least what it encompasses. So is it here? What are the practical, are there already practical applications or manifestations of this? Has the meta-industrial revolution already broken through the door at TELUS?
Well,
indeed, this is more an evolution than a revolution with these so-called enabling technologies. What makes, I would say, these technologies taste a bit different in our world is the nature of the customers we serve. Defense, satellite operators, pilots of civil aircrafts, airlines. So what does it mean for this set of customers? Well, we provide what I call metaverse already. That's why I'm saying it's not new, it's a bit of an evolution. When we offer typically a synthetic environment for these guys to train. So simulation and training is extremely important. I call mini-meta because it doesn't gather millions of users, but a few tens or a few hundreds, it's already quite complex. And the second aspect, which has not been mentioned yet, is how cybersecurity is important. All these digital, I would say, technologies, all these digital revolutions with an S that we see are, I would say, sustainable on the long run if and only if we are able to guarantee the integrity of the data, the integrity of the identity of the people, because we operate what I call safety-critical operations. At the end of the day, life is at stake. So you cannot make a mistake, and you cannot be, I would say, hacked or spoofed by people. And this brings an additional, I would say, special taste to this meta concept.
Especially when you decentralize, right? So you can guarantee the identity of an avatar, for example, or how much an avatar might have in Bitcoin, Ether, or digital assets that you can create some value exchange on a Web 2.0 centralized platform. But how do you do that when you start bringing platforms together? How do I know that the avatar that I'm dealing with, just as an example, is who it says it is, and that they have the kind of value in their wallet that they say they have? And I think, to Patrice's point, that's going to be a critical thing to get right as we all try to move into this next version of the metaverse.
I think if I can make a quick point on that, I just thought about it. One of the biggest challenges, in fact, is going to be the policy environment that has to be created to prevent bad use of the capability that's been created. Keeping up with that, I think, is actually going to be the bottleneck in the whole process. That's either that or it's just not going to be used and you'll get other problems. But the policy change mechanism is way too slow. It's not keeping up with the pace of change. And I think the industrialists and the entrepreneurs can move way more quickly. So I think there has to be a lot of work there, how policy change can keep up with this change, and change in days, not years.
I feel like, please.
If I may add a point to it. At this conference, and we're not just having technologists coming here, we also have the policymakers being part of the audience. And, today with your geopolitical sort of conflicts looming large on the horizon, people start to think about the regulation, they think about national interest, national security. And so that might become an impediment to the meta, right, and industrial revolution. I think this is something everyone should take a note of. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're doing terrific jobs, and especially leveraging all these innovations across different areas. They're doing a remarkable job. And if there's one thing I think they feel frustrated about is regulation, is geopolitical kind of uncertainty. I mean, this actually got a lot of people very confused at this point.
But the other side of the coin is that you have to have some regulation.
Absolutely.
Okay? Independent of geopolitical, there can be all kinds of other abuse of the data.
We're just in a sort of uncharted water right now with this.
So maybe if I could come in on that point, because I think we have a lot of paradoxes still to play out. Web 3, Web 5 pushing towards decentralization, but who really wants to have custody of their own data? Which grandmother is really going to be able to have her own server, right? There are things, I think, ways in which regulations need to create roadmaps for us to navigate through that. Because it may be, rather than a fully decentralized world, we end up with some hybrid of centralized and decentralized. And I think that's probably more likely. But then on the other side of it, so if that's a kind of a paradox, we've also got the known and regulatory world in the context of finance, and then we have the slightly less well-known world around central bank issued digital currencies, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, solar credits, even data as asset classes, where the rules are still being written. And I think to get scale, we'll see lots of experimentation, but to transition from experimentation into use case at scale, we need roadmaps defined, and that's where I think, and I would really welcome the partnership of regulators in this room and more broadly to help us navigate.
But Patrice, I want to come to you, but just briefly, just because it feels like these two issues that you've identified, you collectively have identified over the last couple of minutes. One is cybersecurity and knowing that what you're seeing is real, I guess, on the one hand, and the other is regulation and having that roadmap. That those issues are most pronounced in finance right now. If we think about it, right, everybody's talking about sort of Bitcoin theft and is cryptocurrency a commodity or is it a currency, and who should regulate it? No one could agree. Is it the case that when we talk about this meta-industrial revolution, that these early issues are being most discussed, that it will affect the whole space in finance? And then I promise I'll come to you, but we'll go to one more finance guy, and then come to you. I promise, Patrice.
So the quick answer on this is that you have multiple speeds. Industry is definitely playing it faster than regulators, and politicians and policymakers are actually driving the regulators to try and come up with an answer quickly, because no politician wants for their jurisdiction to be a latecomer to what is going to be an important industry. So there are some markets, some regulators who are a little bit farther ahead than others in this space. And then maybe the other thing I'd say is we have started experimenting and playing with the custody of, you mentioned custody, the custody of digital assets. And in the first instance, the digital asset that exists that we can custodize happens to be Bitcoin and Ether. But the reason we did that wasn't because we want to custodize Bitcoin and Ether. Eventually, this is about tokenization of other assets. Yes, public assets, but one could say there's not much of a problem in clearing, settling, custodizing public assets today. But there is in private assets, real estate, art, and other forms of assets that are illiquid, that are hard to fractionalize, and that are difficult for people to actually want to invest in, to actually do so. And so this is about creating the rails in this new environment to enable people to actually invest in assets that have been very difficult to invest in so far.
Let me go to Patrice and then.
No, let me just bring another idea to this discussion. Be it for finance, be it for medcare, healthcare, or telecom, we all need to protect our data. It all starts with data, okay? Protecting data means encrypting data, cryptology. And the fact that quantum computing will arrive one day, and we were discussing that backstage, is both a fantastic opportunity, to deal with very complex mathematical problems, issues, and to solve things that were impossible to solve before. But at the same time, this same computer would be able to break any crypto algorithm known for the moment. So privacy will disappear. Our digitalization, be it for Meta or any other kind of digital transformation, will be at threat. Then we need to work on this second aspect, which is less favorable. How do we invent new algorithms to continue to protect our data, even if quantum computing will arrive one day?
Just if you just imagine what we are talking about in a simplistic way. This is the life that we are living in, the physical world that we are more or less living in and doing business and going through each and everything that we know today. There will be a totally new virtual life that is going to be driving business, telling people how to educate themselves, helping us to test all new ideas in a much faster, more computing power being used, and so on. It needs to be safe. It needs to be secure. Data governance and data protection, taxation mechanisms needs to be all there, and so on and so forth. It's still nascent, moving into different stages in different countries, but I think it is here to stay and here to happen at some point. And it's a function of how we collectively approach it as countries and as industries to really move into it one stage at a time, because it's an ecosystem that will come together and a couple of technologies that will come together to shape it.
Patrick, if I might, very briefly, give me an example of a manifestation, a use of a product or service from the meta-industrial revolution that you've touched in business already.
And so we invest globally. I invested in an American company, is leading in global early stage cancer diagnostic business. It's called Grail. And they have conducted the largest clinical trial in human history with 300,000 patients enrolled, so they have a lot of data. But interestingly, most of the people thought this is just a healthcare play. But half of the team, they're AI guys. They came from Google. And so I talked to some of the AI experts in the world. Now we're talking about speed of change, and they said that speed of learning by the machines is 10x a year. And that's how fast. You know, in the real world, we talk about revenue is, doubling is a lot. But the amount of the speed of learning is 10x or even faster than that. Then on top of that, when you have great findings coming out of this, then you start, this is still a real world product because it's a kit, it's a diagnostic kit. And then it's subject to Wright's law. Every time you double the volume, the cost will also come down. So it's really amazing. It's atoms meeting bytes. And a lot of kind of this good stuff, innovations kind of blended into one business model, creating really, really powerful business. And every person in this room could be benefiting from it in a very, very large way. It's not just a healthcare product, it's prescribed by the doctors, it's actually a consumer level product because everybody, when you get to a little bit older, age 50 and older, the chance of getting cancer is real for everybody. The whole game is finding it early, so this is AI at play. This is, I think, meta-industry revolution at play.
But to that point, and I agree with everything that you said, then you said it very well, but the other side you'll just throw at it. I'm a supporter of this, but at the same time, I'll give you an example along the lines you're talking about. People get stroke, okay? And sometimes when the stroke happens, you don't know when it's going to happen. It certainly happens. And we've built methods through which you know people who are at risk and so on and so forth, and you kind of keep an eye on them. Through this methodology, if you get access to what patients or what people are doing, there are probably habitual changes in people or habitual trends in people that can predict a stroke like weeks and weeks and weeks before it actually happens, okay, which is in principle a good thing. Then you can do something about it and keep that person alive or well. The bad thing is your privacy goes away because I know exactly what you're doing all the time, and from that I can predict that, well, you went to this room 5 times or you did this 5 times, your privacy's gone away. Are you willing to put up with that if it's going to save your life? So this is I don't have any black and white answers here, but the problem here is that the example you're giving is a positive example, but it can be used the wrong way, and that's why I say that the policy change methodology and the agenda also needs to understand what's going on. They can't apply yesterday's policies here. And I think there needs to be focus along that and thought along that so that they can keep up with this tool that we've got that we've all talked about.
It's interesting. So we've segued nicely from a conversation a little bit about use cases. Well, we started with what the heck is the meta-industrial revolution to what are the use cases, what they might be. We got a little bit into that, and we've now moved into it can be a force for good, though there are risks.
Risks.
Other risks, Ken? So 2 things. One, if you had to guess right now, the meta-industrial revolution will be more of a force for good or bad, and where do you see the opportunities versus the risks?
Sure. So let me start maybe on the kind of force for good side, because I think it's how we use the technology. Technology itself has to live within a framework, and it has to live within the confines of the companies that actually use it and the principles of those companies. So it can be good or it can be bad. Let me give you some examples of metaverse-style technologies, even augmented reality technologies, AI, so 4th industrial revolution technologies being used for good. To me, imagine today some of the industries. I was struck, I was in Dubai recently, and a gentleman from the Dubai Ports Authority was talking about how they now have people, women, actually working in industries that used to require manual physical labor and therefore were dominated by men, right? But through artificial intelligence, through robotics, you're taking away the need for manual labor, and you're empowering sections of our economy that were excluded from those types of roles in the past. You can suddenly get them. Also, examples, people who maybe have physical disabilities, right? Maybe they're in a wheelchair, maybe they're suffering, maybe they don't speak a language, right? Suddenly technology can cross those barriers. So it opens up a huge amount of inclusivity angles, diversity angles. Similarly with sustainability. As we start to connect supply chains, I think we can do tremendous things for educating consumers on the choices that they make and how that can support the planet. And even for things like digital inclusion and financial inclusion, I think some of the digital assets we talked about, turning physical goods into assets that can be traded, rights, NFTs, things that were hard to actually trade and transact with before, can suddenly open up ways to include people, both financially and digitally, that were excluded. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but of course there are pitfalls and challenges.
So, I mean, we use 2.0, but the virtual reality gamification that leads to risk profile identification. So effectively, an individual puts these goggles on and plays a game, and it results in the ability of an interpreter of the game results to actually construct an investment portfolio that matches the risk profile of the individual that has just played the game. The risks that Patrice and Ken both identified is what happens if that data gets lost? What happens if there is a misinterpretation of that data? What happens if the fine print on that data in one country and the fine print in another country don't match? Can you use the data in the same way in different places? Now, you add decentralization to that, as we were saying earlier, and then you've got a supposedly borderless technology superimposed on which is a bunch of borders that just don't make any sense. And we've got to get through all of that.
Another risk, Oleon, if I could address this to you, is that as we already are now, we spend even more time sort of empowered by this immersive technology, by this revolution, apart. Yeah. I spend 12 hours a day on my phone. That's 12 hours I'm not talking to other people. If we're talking about the pluses and minuses...
I agree with you. The amount of time that's been spent on the internet, as we know it today, is already reaching to those levels where we need to be careful. I'm afraid with this new life, within the digital life and virtual reality, more time is going to be spent, which we have to worry about the consequences of it, whether it's the signs of depression or the signs of obesity or the signs of being ignorant sometimes to ethical behaviors or being connected to the world in a way that that means something to us in the real world. I think all of these are very important to be looked into as we are moving towards the adoption of the technology. We haven't reached yet to the stage where we need to have to attend to issues as far as now is concerned, but I think it's coming, and we need to be prepared for it. Things that will define what is ethical for people to be looked into in this new world. Things that relates to preserving culture and making sure that cultural heritage is being preserved across the globe is very important. We think that these are elements that needs to be preserved and as we move forward and define a new norm within the virtual world.
Yeah, just let me go to Patrice, please.
Yeah, just to remind on these different points, I do think as tech companies, we can do things to prevent, I would say, wrong usages of, or wrong use cases of technologies. We cannot wait for governments to write or issue regulation. that's one part of the answer. But we have also our own responsibility with our own engineers to make sure that when they developed AI algorithm, for instance, or when we use biometrics, if I take another technology, we set, I would say, internal kind of guidelines, charter, to push our people to think how they can, I would say, counter unconscious bias in algorithm, how they can think of the, I would say, end usage of the technology, so that we have our own, I would say, ways to mitigate this bad or less positive aspect of technologies and work for the good.
I want to broach our last topic or idea that we cannot avoid here, which is we're supposed to be looking at how this revolution is going to affect the new global order. And I was just thinking about how, you know, historians say, hey, I'll make sure that we're on the right side of history because I'm going to write it. And I wonder if it's the same in technology, where if you produce the components that are necessary to enable this revolution, then you can make sure that you're okay, but those that don't have the technology aren't necessarily okay. So I'm wondering, Omar, to put you on the spot, as you know, one of the world's largest chip makers, if, you know, for example, this does exist. You know, Intel has this ability to, and headquartered in the United States has this ability to produce these chips, but not everyone necessarily will get to access those chips and that technology. What do you make of that? I mean, and what do we need to do to ensure that everyone is along for the ride in a good sense with this revolution?
Well, you know, from a business perspective, if everyone is not allowed those chips, my business will be smaller. So
Sure.
I'm going to watch that for a start.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it to people who need it. Now, the only reason you don't want to give it to others is because, you know, there's usage that you don't want or someone doesn't want with the chip that you're producing. And that goes back to, you know, how it's being used and what it's being used for. And it goes back to the policy and the regulations that we talked about. I mean, I don't have any black and white answers here, but all I know is that two things. First, the demand will continue to grow. That's not going to stop. So there's an unending demand of chips because it's the core of everything we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The second is the fact that, you know, this global balancing that's happening right now is needed. Forget about the geopolitics, just from a environmental, not environmental, but from a disaster perspective. You put all your chips in one place and there's a cyclone there and you shut it down. That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You need backups. So it needs to be globally diversified for all kinds of logical reasons. So, you know, I don't know how you stop things completely.
Yeah.
You know, they'll come up with their own version of it at some point.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to this regulation thing that we talked about, that it's important for us to think through that, and the regulators have to, working with us, move at a much, much faster speed, and they have to realize that.
Patrick, I want to give you an opportunity to
Well, listen,
respond to that. I mean, M31 invests in Chinese companies, some of which, for example, I'm going to have to wrap this up, so if you can keep your answer to like 30 seconds. But you know, you invest in some Chinese companies that want to go global that, for example, don't have access to Intel's chips right now.
Yeah, first of all, I think when we talk about businesses, a lot of times we think about is American companies or Chinese companies from whatever, wherever. But here's the thing. If you're a real good business, you're helping the world solve a real problem. And look, today, there's a big inflation globally. There's energy inflation, but who are solving the problems? And 97% of the solar supplies are coming from China. But when you go to those companies, you think this is just old traditional manufacturing businesses. No, you walk in. This year, I visited a few of them. You actually don't see workers, human workers. It's fully automated. And there's Internet of Things and in real action. It's really amazing to see how much computing power is going to be actually leveraged, employed to achieve something really amazing for everybody. We are all looking for solutions for our problems. The company could be from Saudi Arabia, could be from China, could be from America, and I think they're doing real stuff.
Well, if the meta-industrial revolution was a movie, I hope this was a very useful trailer because it was very quick, and I think we covered a lot of ground. So, Patrick, everyone, please join me in thanking Patrice, Omar, Hani, Ken, Patrick, of course, again, and Olean. A real pleasure.